Hello, everybody. Welcome to Writing for Peace Sunday Live. It's great to see everybody. For Valentine's Day, I am going to start out with a poem by Ellen Bass. It's the poem titled Gate C22. And it looks like it's a long poem, but I just put it in really large type to help me read, so it's not really 3 pages long. Gate C22. At Gate C22 in the Portland airport, a man in a broadband leather hat kissed a woman arriving from Orange County. They kissed and kissed and kissed. Long after the other passengers clicked the handles of their carry-ons and wheeled briskly toward short-term parking, the couple stood there, arms wrapped around each other, like he'd just staggered off the boat at Ellis Island, like she'd been released at last from ICU, snapped out of a coma, survived bone cancer, made it down from Annapurna in the only clothes she was wearing. Neither of them was young. His beard was gray. She carried a few extra pounds you can imagine her saying she had to lose. But they kissed lavish kisses like the ocean in the early morning, the way it gathers and swells, sucking each rock under, swallowing it again and again. We all were watching. Passengers waiting for the delayed flight to San Jose, the stewardesses, the pilots, the aproned woman icing Cinnabons, the man selling sunglasses. We couldn't look away. We could taste the kisses crushed in our mouths. But the best part was his face, when he drew back and looked at her, his smile soft with wonder, almost as though he were a mother still open from giving birth, as your mother must have looked at you, no matter what happened after. If she beat you or left you or you're lonely now, you once lay there, the vernix not yet wiped off, and someone gazed at you as if you were the first sunrise seen from Earth. The whole wing of the airport hushed. All of us trying to slip into that woman's middle-aged body, her plaid Bermuda shorts, sleeveless blouse, glasses, the gold hoop earrings, tilting our heads up. And that's from The Human Line, Copper Canyon Press, 2007, by Ellen Bass. It's one of my favorite poems. So tonight we have the wonderful opportunity of spending time with CMarie Fuhrman, and I'm so grateful she's willing to collaborate and be here. And I have a bio. CMarie Fuhrman is the author of Camped Beneath the Dam, Poems by Floodgate 2020, and co-editor of Native Voices, Tupelo 2019. She has published poetry and nonfiction in multiple journals, including Emergence Magazine, Yellow Medicine Review, Cutthroat, a Journal of the Arts, Whitefish Review, Broadsided Press, Taos International Journal of Poetry and Art, as well as several anthologies. CMarie is a regular columnist for The Inlander, the translations editor for Broadsided Press, nonfiction editor for High Desert Journal, and director of the Elk River Writers Conference. She resides in the mountains of West Central Idaho. Welcome, CMarie.
Thank you. Thank you, and welcome to everybody that has joined me here tonight, joined all of us here, but me and my, I was just telling everyone that we're in about 4.5 feet of snow. So it's nice to bring all of you into my house with me and share a wonderful winter's evening.
Thank you. I have to apologize. Right after I started talking, Tara started jangling around and bumping into the table. So that's the dog. If things start rocking around here, it's her. We're keeping it real. We have that first question that I mentioned, CMarie, and that is, how about what's a book or books that have been influential to you, books from your childhood?
I love that question. And I love that Tara was jingling around, because I think the first one I think of was one I checked out in kindergarten all the time. And it wasn't the Pokey Little Puppy, but it was something along those lines. I can still see where it was on those kindergarten shelves, this pink and silver. I'm sure it was one of those little golden books, but something about that maybe the familiarity or whatever it was, every time I checked it out, despite my mother asking me to please get something else. As I was telling you earlier, frog and toad also. And I think it was because there's something magical and maybe something in me that believes that those animals do have voices and can talk. And that magic was important to my writing. It was important to the growth of my creative spirit and to the way I see the world. So I think having those books with those animals with voices meant a lot to me and resonated well. And I still believe that. I still believe that all of those beings have voices that perhaps we cannot hear. So that was hugely influential and helped me believe in a world that maybe we weren't quite able to see. As I got older, and 30 years ago, I think a book that really influenced me was Goodbye to a River by John Graves. And in that, he was able to give voice to a river. And that when I read that, I thought, this is something I wish I could do. This is something I want to do. And that book, in so many ways, I was living in a house without electricity and water. I was stealing water from the neighbor's house to flush my toilets. I was in a pretty bad place in life. And I read that book, and it was, sometimes a book does that for us, as we all know, or a story or a poem. And it kind of lifts you out of a place and sets you back on the track that you need to go on. And even though it would be 45 or not 45, 25 years until I got onto the writing track, John Graves had a lot to do with getting me there, for sure.
Sounds wonderful. That when you were talking about the magical aspect and the animals being able to talk, it made me think about reading how you give proper names to some of the trees around where you live. Does that connect in any way to that magical presence or the ability for them to have a knowing or speaking?
I think it does, and I'm careful to do that, because who am I to name the tree? And I feel that way about modern taxonomies as well,
Mhm.
and not having the indigenous names for the trees and plants. I learned hello or good morning relative here, so I can go out and say that's may we meet him, and talk to them and hope they recognize some of the Nimi Putemt that was here long before we were. But I've gotten so used to Winston, who is a Doug fir that is the closest to our house, and the oldest, maybe one of the oldest trees here by the cabin, that he's just become kind of a personality in a way. We can talk about, there's what kind of bird might be on Winston, or a squirrel that's got up Winston. So they all start developing, the trees, just like anything else, develop their own personalities and their own critters that live in them. And certainly within those rings, I've always been fascinated by what sounds lie within the rings of trees, what they've heard, those songs they've heard long before, we were here, before this house was here, and how those are somehow still in the heartwood. And
Beautiful.
I believe that in some ways, when they're soughing in the wind, and when the woodpeckers are tapping on them, that they're in their way also talking back to us.
What you were just talking about spoke to me and resonates with me, but there are fir trees across the street out the window, and I have written so many haikus and poems for them on my nights of insomnia. And some of them I've written down and some of them I haven't, but it really spoke to me that here I have this intimate relationship with words with them, and I've never thought about their names. And a very interesting connection there. So thank you for sharing that and exploring that aspect about the trees. What would you like to start out reading for us?
So I'm such a sucker for themes, and I thought I want to do some sort of a love theme. It's Valentine's Day. Like, I'll get out all the stuff I've written on love, and that amounted to about 7 or 8 sentences. But then I realized that most of what I write is a love story, and it's a love story of place, and this place I'm in. I'm very fortunate to be in the middle. I see my friend David Gallipoli is here. We're just in such a gorgeous place in High Idaho. that allows for recreation that a lot of people don't get. We're surrounded by public lands and a huge wilderness, and until people discovered Boise, we were largely unknown. And so I've really fallen in love with that. So I'm going to start with a poem that takes us there, and then we'll kind of come back to winter, if you're up for it, winter in McCall. But we'll start with the poem, and it's January, Silver and Glass. Look how night slips between the trees. From this blue-black cold, even darkness runs. In the naked aspen, a woman, her arms extended, her lips moving. I cannot hear them, but her words are daylight. Look how the dark knots are like eyes in the aspen, whose white arms reach into the knifed air. Snow buries the tender trunk where deer might graze. The stars fall into the woman's hair and disappear. White sky, white snow, white bark, woman. I have been standing too long at this winter window. It is time to go inside. Thank you. That I remember during the occupation at Standing Rock, and during the what was going on at Standing Rock, how the heaviness of the snow and the white reminded me of how the aspen are continually bent over that snow, but continually rise up. And that came from a series of poems I wrote about those little trees back there, and how you've all done this. If you stand at night in front of your window and you've got your fireplace behind you or candle or whatever, the reflection you get back is not from the outside, but it's of yourself. And I think that's one way we can truly see ourselves in those places, and realize that we are reflecting back to ourselves in so many things. So the next piece is a recipe for Swedish pancakes by my mother. So that's another sticking with the love theme. We talked a little bit about my mom. To survive the pandemic, her and her 85-year-old boyfriend decided to start a landscaping company, and they would show up at these people's houses that were 30, and these two 85-year-olds get out to mow their yards. And she's a fantastic woman, a very strong woman, and someone I obviously look up to and adore. So I wrote this piece for her, and it appears in the Inlander about a year and a half ago. I will never learn to pin my S like hers, that 1940s scribe. The upright spine of the stem line, the top loop leaning back ever so casually, making the whole letter seem as if it's falling, though it is definitely not. The bottom loop is a long skirt caught mid-swirl, and the flare at the end is her leg kicking finally free, or her gesturing palm saying, "Here, it's yours." My mother's is a Gone with the Wind S. My mother's S is her at the stove canning peaches, tomatoes, and green beans. The back of her hand to her forehead, where thoughts like what I do for this family pass before a timer reminds her to lift the jars from the steaming water. Her S's final swash was the pop of lids as jars cooled, a check off the list of things to do, a list she never wrote down. And see the way her S stands apart, alone at the beginning, space almost for another letter. Though her S is indelibly important to the whole, the others are connected, W to E, E to D, and so on. Her S is leaning back as if trying to see the H, or maybe all the way to P. Her S is a mother duck following its ducklings. Then again, maybe this S is an S I never knew. She's looking back, away from the smaller letters and the pregnant second loop. But what do I make of that slash? Does my mother's S regret? Is there a word she wished to plural? The line doubles back on itself, cuts through its middle, makes an interdictory mark, the symbol for no. Only here does the character seem rushed, as if dashed off. No, this is not right. I can see how the pin was tenderly lifted from the paper, just as she raised each thin cake from the griddle and placed them on our wide breakfast plates, withdrawing the spatula cautiously so as not to tear. My mother's S would never say no. My mother's S always asked, seconds? This S is my mother sitting on the red line of a recipe card, her arms bracing her curves as she looks down at her instructions watching if I will get the recipe right. There are only 5 ingredients, I hear her say, then sift, stir, pour, etc. But look at how my S's have turned out. The first stroke leans forward, headlong, eager, it seems, to catch the other letters or drive them away. Not one loop, no circle closing. How quick my S tangos, but with none of her flair. The last of my letters simply coils into itself, like a surreptitious snake or a timidly wound crepe. And yet, something of her S remains in mine. Fine, flat, steadfast, and flexible. Surely this I learned from her. So that story came about from an exercise in a flash fiction flash fiction guidebook. And it was to find the smallest thing you could and expand on it as widely as possible. So I had just made Swedish pancakes for my family here, and I picked up the recipe card and focused in on that one S at the top. And this is what came from it that spoke so much of her.
What a lovely story.
Thank
Robert,
you.
Robert Costick says, love does come in many forms, from many places. Great, honest poems.
Oh,
Carmel says, yes, beautiful.
thank you.
One of the things that ended up being part of an article, but it caught my eye. It's a quote from, I think it was from the Inland, but my people raised shorthorns on a ranch in Hall, Montana, I told her. Later, my people took jobs as engineers at Hewlett Packard, joined the PTA, and enrolled me in cello lessons. We celebrated Serbian Christmas. Among these people that you describe, do you have a role model for your current life as a writer or creative in that vein?
Oh, as far as my immediate family, no. I think my work ethic definitely comes from my mother, and my father, who passed in 2011, was a storyteller. He definitely got my interest or spiked my attention with the way that he would tell stories of his youth that almost made me wish they were my stories. And so I think that helped, though he never wrote them down. We were a family of readers, and I'm really glad for that. But I think that if there's what I think there are 3 women that I would have to point to when I say role model. And the first would be Kim Barnes, who remains one of my closest friends. She was my dearest mentor through grad school. Her writing is so honest and it hides nothing. And what I've learned from her about writing changed everything for me. So she's been definitely my greatest mentor. Nan Shepherd, who passed long ago, long before I could have met her, wrote a book called The Living Mountain. And she was from Scotland, and she just in how she wrote about women in wilderness really mattered to me. It wasn't about conquering. It wasn't about going there to escape anything or to find herself. It was just being. And that meant a great deal to me. And the last would be, and there are many, gosh, it's so hard to say. I think as I'm saying this, I'm thinking of the poet Stacy Bow Miller, who is just a phenomenal poet. And I call her my soul poet because she writes a poem and it makes me want to sit down and write. But Linda Hogan, who has become a dear friend. When I first started writing, I reached out to her and asked her some questions, and she started supporting me from the very beginning. And how she's chosen to live her life and surround herself with animals. And she gets up every morning, she sits up and she starts writing, and she starts writing as truthfully as she can, and in a way that I know she hopes is going to make a difference to what happens to our planet and the beings on it. So those are definitely the women I look up to the most.
Yes, that's lovely. Well, I'm going to piggyback on that. I have another question that relates to it. On the, let's see, I was on your website. You talk about, I have notes in my notebook, I have notes over here. A quote from your website. An elder once told me that education is only good when it is passed on. Will you share a memorable time when you were on the receiving end of an educational experience? And since you were just talking about some of the role models, that made me think of it, this question. Or maybe on the giving end, like I have had some exchanges with students as teaching that have just been monumental moments that I won't forget. So I was curious if you've had one of those on the giving or receiving end that's significant or very meaningful to you that you would share with us.
On the receiving end, going back to the Inlander column that you were speaking of, I work with an ex-con who's trying to write his memoir. And when we were working on it together, some of the language in it was a little off-putting to me. And I go into it from, where I write, and I was in academia before I decided to step away from that and teach private or teach in workshops, which I feel can reach the people I'm really interested in working with. But Drew, who I mentioned in the Inlander column, who's great with actually me speaking his name, so that's all right. He wanted to write his story as he lived it, and that included words that were offensive to some people and to women in particular. And I wanted him to take them out. And he pushed back, and he's like, but then it's not my real story. And I had to sit with it for a while. And then he handed me a book called Pimp. And it's by a man named Iceberg Slim. And it was written in the 40s about a Black man who was a pimp in Chicago and then into California. And the first sentence is, a pimp is happiest when his whores giggle. And I was like, oh God, am I going to get through this? And the lesson that I learned from all of this was I did get through it. The book is fantastic. And I learned a lot from it, even if I was uncomfortable. But I learned that discomfort was just as important as the book I was reading and why I was uncomfortable, but it was the truth. And a lot of times in publishing, we don't get that. We get what's been cultivated for us and what's been handed down. So we believe that people, whether they're performing their culture or not, are giving us the truth. But then we find out that things have been modified or changed to make more palatable and sadly more sellable. So the lesson, that I got from Drew, from him handing me that book and from him believing in his writing, was for me to also be able to write more honestly. And so that was a great lesson that isn't that old, it's a 6 months old or so. I think one of the best moments in teaching and in education, and I do believe that education is not something that we're supposed to keep. It's something that we hopefully add to and pass on, like a good sourdough starter or something. But would be an older woman that I worked with in Port Townsend, and her trying so hard to write her memoir. And we had some private sessions. If you've been to Port Townsend, it's a kind of a morning session with a whole group, and then you can set up some private sessions afterwards. And her and I would meet and work on it. And we went back and forth on getting this thing about her brother right. And without giving too much away, it turned out her brother had sexually assaulted her. And it wasn't necessary that maybe go in the story, but it was necessary for her to admit it. And when we know we know what the story is trying to do, when we understand that this is why our conscience is so eager for us to tell the story, then all of that information opens us up to be able to tell a bigger story. In the end, she did put, very, very deftly, very briefly about what he had done to her with the same hands that she kept focusing on when they were older. And all of us, when she wrote it at the end of that week, were just, our jaws were down because it was so beautiful. So being able to help someone open up and find the story that they want to tell is always my greatest teaching moment, to give them the tools to do that, or even sometimes the permission to tell their story.
Thank you. Writing for Peace supports writers of all ages and different places on the writing path. And these glimpses into the writing process about speaking your truth and about significant learning experiences on either side of it, I think are really important to share and model. So I appreciate you sharing both of those.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking.
What else would you like to read for us?
Do you want to hear more about West Central Idaho?
Absolutely.
Okay. The story, I'm just going to read an excerpt from a story called Resound. It's on Contraviento. You can go to their website and read the whole thing. I was looking for a way in for a story, and I think as writers, there always has to be this gate that opens that lets us in to tell a story that we want to tell. There's just something that unlocks it. And this particular afternoon, we decided to go cross-country skiing under a place called No Business Lookout, which is on No Business Mountain, which is a great name for a mountain. But it was an old abandoned farmhouse, and we decided to ski out to it. And this is the beginning of that, and how I kind of came to peace with the long 7-8 month winters we have here. We began on the road beneath bluebird skies and brilliant sun, our skis gliding comfortably in the tracks left by snowmobiles. But we wanted to get off their trail. We were fearful for our 2 dogs. Rumor around town spoke of a young man setting leg traps along West Mountain Road, this road. So as soon as the tracks rose up to the meadow, we stepped out onto untouched snow, cutting new creases in the field. The dogs, eager to explore, ran ahead, but weren't able to stay atop the soft crust, could gain no purchase. Reluctantly, they filed in between my partner Caleb and me, walking easily on the hard pack his weight created. Slowly as we skied on, clouds started stealing in from the northeast, gathering at Council Mountain and threatening more weather. All weekend, we had watched the storms come and go, sometimes dropping as much as an inch of snow in an hour, other times pelting our roof with graupel. It had been an unsettled February. We fell easily into the rhythm of our exercise. The lenitive swish, swish of our skis in tandem carried us over what would be, in summer, lush grazing for black-faced cattle, maybe red Herefords, or a field nesting yellow-breasted meadowlark. Animals and colors unimaginable in this, the deepest of our winter months. Blue sky offered hope for a departure from the palette dichromatic, merely white and brown. Even the needles of the pines of the foothills before us were frosted, covered in gray. When I first moved to Idaho 7 years earlier, this silence was damning. I spent the winter months feeling trapped by weather, longing for my feet on bare earth, driving south when weather permitted in hopes of seeing green, seeing the yellow of an arrowleaf balsam root in the canyons near Boise, hearing water rush in the North Fork of the Piet. But I had fallen in love with the mountain freshets in spring, with the golden beaked tanager that came to our feeder, with the wild and sweet huckleberries and dashing crimson paintbrush, and the robin trilling her morning song, the bugle of the elk, and nights in the wilderness to the north when air was graced with the long holy melody of wolves at midnight. And the larch becoming the flame on the hillside, the surrender of summer, the cant of light in autumn pushing warmth through the boughs as the rivers return to lower flows. The first snow became the sigh that brought us into our cabin and into rest, the quiet calming us as it does the hibernating bear and the rattlesnakes in their den. There is a beauty here that can only be recognized when I accept each season as a part of a greater cycle. What this deep moisture feeds are the gamut and chorus of summer. When I look to the miles of deep white snow across the pasture and up the mountainside, I know the dream of the lily-petaled trillium beneath, the thimbleberry that will stain my tongue in August. Yet winter at this high elevation can be deadly. The deep snows can become a trap for both fawns and elk calves born late in the summer, as well as full-grown ungulates that find themselves stuck in chest-deep drifts, unable to outrun a predator or starved by the moisture that buries their graze. In McCall, the town where we live, families of mule deer and a variety of fox have come to depend on handouts to keep them alive at an elevation they might otherwise descend from. But this generosity doesn't reach more rural landscapes, proof of which now lay ahead in a circle of fur and hooves, pink droplets of fresh blood that have melted and stained the snow. The doe was likely a yearling. Its deathbed was surrounded by the tracks and scat of a variety of birds and mammals, coyote, magpie, raven, and it seemed a mink. Likely it was a wolf who brought her down, but perhaps she was already stuck and the canine visitation was one of relief, a quicker death than starvation. We bent to the scene with the interest of biologists or sociologists, learning to understand this wild society and appreciating its natural sense. There was something easy in the deer, like the loss of life to sustain others. I have watched osprey snatch fish from a high mountain lake and once a bald eagle grab a full-grown goose from the sky above the Snake River. And though it was difficult to witness, I could not begrudge the animals I revere doing what they do to survive. All I love in this vast and wild landscape includes a substantial amount of appropriate death. We rose from the scene and continued to ski toward the tree line. Caleb veered east, recalling an abandoned homestead he had heard about from a colleague. We glanced at the horizon and spotted the telltale stand of trees born in this clear meadowland. It was near, maybe a mile or less, and we lengthened our strides, our imaginations churning in silence. Thank you. Oh, I think you're muted, Juniper.
The dog was jangling around, so it ended up muting us. So I'm trying to keep her business out of the poetry reading. Sorry about that. I was saying that is absolutely beautiful, and that is a love poem. That is a love essay. There's love in all of the details and the knowing, and the intimacies with the land and the particulars of the different seasons. It echoes for me the piece that you sent me to read that hasn't been published or wasn't, or at least is not out in the digital land. And there's a line that this piece made me think of, and that is, if to nothing else, I am obedient to the seasons. And that line there just resonates so many different ways through your writing. And even our conversation about snow and the aspects before we started the reading. So I'll wait on that. I might jump back to that and ask a question related to it, but we have a couple in the comments, and one was by Carmel. What is the elevation there?
We're just about a mile, so we're not particularly high elevation, but where we are kind of sits on this fault line between Cascadia and kind of a mountain shadow desert. So we tend to get the same kind of amount of rains and stuff as the Pacific Northwest, but we're just high enough that it becomes snow, and it stays snow from about October until April or May. And we've had snow here on the 4th of July and Labor Day, and it can come out of nowhere very quickly. So it is, being obedient to the seasons here is something we do by choice, but also gathering wood is something we must do. We heat only with a wood stove, and being careful here in the winter is a real thing. We have a low enough population that going off the road could mean that you're off the road for a day, and that getting lost could mean that you're lost for several days, because we don't have quite the cell service as other places, and it is really remote, and 5 feet of snow can be dangerous, and the heat can be dangerous as well here in the summer. So yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Another question, and this one is by Michael Sims. Excuse me. What lessons do the Native American cultures have to teach us about community and our relationship to the land?
Gosh, it's terribly difficult for me to answer for every Native person or community or Indigenous culture that's out there. But I think that generally speaking, because my ancestors and because Native people still believe and practice a place-based religion, the nature isn't separate from. There's a wonderful book called by Richard Nelson, and it's called The Island Within. And he talks about the Koyukon people, and he asked them a question similar. He asked, how do you develop this relationship? And they didn't understand it. They didn't know what he meant by how is nature different from someone who doesn't see nature as a relative, because we live in houses that separate us and don't live hand to mouth. I hunt. I hunt animals as well as morels and berries, but I also go to the grocery store quite often. So my dependency on nature isn't quite the same as it was for the Koyukon or for many indigenous cultures in this part of the United States. So to answer the question quickly, I would say that they're so weaved together that it's you can't have a native community or culture without nature, nor do I believe that we can have nature without native communities. And I think that we'll see more and more as I hope that we see more and more that the ethnobotany, that the stories teach us that maybe our job isn't so much to extract, but maybe because frankly, as we all know, I'm sure that the planet would be much better without us. But maybe the only reason that we were put here, since we are not an integral part of the landscape, is just to worship it, and we've failed miserably in that way, and we are failing miserably, and that was not the case with Native societies. Back to the Koyukon people, they believed that if you ever insulted the weather, that it would stop being kind to you. So to even say, oh, the snow, or this sucks, or I can't, whatever, was insulting weather. And what a horrible thing to do. It'd be like insulting a relative. So our culture the American culture as we have it today has been built on extracting from nature, and those cultures were far from that. We're part of nature, knowing that any damage done to nature was a damage done to themselves. And I think us getting closer to that and understanding how those communities thrive, and many of them still thrive, will help us all live more responsibly in this place.
What a generous answer or response.
Thank you.
I came to know a little bit about you through social media, and I was telling Carmel a little bit about it earlier, that one of the reasons why I was drawn to you is because of how you move through the world and what you choose to share, and how you do worship the land and the animals. And it's not just through your writing, but how you walk and how you take us on those adventures with you. And I'm just so grateful for that presence, because not just the pandemic, but my long work hours and my different obligations, I can't always have my feet on the trail and my hands on a tree, but I can check in every once in a while and see what you're up to, and be on this meaningful, deep journey with somebody who does care and is a good steward and worships the land. So I'm grateful for that. And you do that on the page so beautifully. So beautiful.
Thank you.
I want to roll down here. I want to make sure there's some other comments. David said, beautiful, I know this place. Thank you, about what you'd read earlier. And then appropriate death in quotes, nice. And then Michael Sims just said, thank you for your wisdom about your last response.
Oh, thank you, Mike.
I think that I want to get you reading again, but I also want you to have a chance to tell us about the anthology. I think it's an important thing to speak about so more people know about it. Your Native Voices anthology.
Yeah, I love talking about that anthology. That goes back to Jeffrey Levine, and he is the editor-in-chief at Tupelo Press, of another person huge mentor in my life and for whom I have so much gratitude, a beautiful human being. If you haven't read his poetry, if you don't know who he is, do yourself a favor and get to know him. Just fantastic. Anyway, he and I met and we started talking about this, that there wasn't a collection of Native poetry available since the 1980s. And together with Dean Rader, we started collecting these poems to put in an anthology. But the most important part of that anthology to me, that still remains the most important part, are the essays in there. And what we asked each poet to do was to write about craft, because for so long as Native poets, we are asked about context. And this goes back to performing a culture too. And asked, if someone wrote a poem that didn't include something that was Indian, why it didn't, or if it did, how what did that have to say about the culture, and what were they talking about in it? What was it like living there or growing up or being there? But rarely were Native poets ever asked about the craft and treated as if they were poets, writ large, just poets. And the one thing that we wanted to do with that anthology was make sure that they were seen as poets. Certainly Native poets to give them that platform, to give us a stage for that, but also just as poets. And we tried, and I think that we succeeded in their bios, not to talk so much about their lives and their growing up, but to talk about how they had mastered poetry and what readers could look for within their poems and draw from. I felt going through school when I was very young, there wasn't Native poetry available. So there was nowhere to turn. But when I was in my graduate degree, a few years ago, there was nothing I could give my students. I taught and I ran a program called IKEEP, Indigenous Knowledge for Effective Education program. There wasn't much I could hand them about craft from the very people that should be teaching them, the relatives. They're people who have had shared experience. So making sure that I had a hand in creating that was hugely important. But the poems in there's just some amazing work, and the relationships that have blossomed from that work. I see my friend Barbara here has joined us. That's one of the relationships that has come from it. But it's just a place, I think, that these poets are gathered with story, which makes complete sense to community and culture, and can offer something both in the classroom and to young people who want to write that aren't in the classroom, because we know that MFA is a privilege and college is a privilege, and it's often education in colonial society is not something that's easily loved within Native communities for obvious reasons. When students were taken to school 200 years ago, 100 years ago, what came of it was not good. So this I hoped was a book that could come into the home and be a teacher and a guide, as well as a place, a repository for these poems.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing about it. And where's the best place to purchase this?
You can get it from Tupelo, yeah, and the ever-present, omnipotent Amazon as well, but to buy directly from a publisher at Tupelo.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I think that the rest I might do one more follow-up, but how about another segment of writing or piece of writing? And even if it goes a little bit past, that's fine, because we have our after party we go into. So you don't have to worry about that time here.
Okay. I chose, well, like I said in the beginning, that I was going for a theme, and this theme, with the exception of the foray into my mother's Swedish pancakes, is my love affair with nature and the love I have for place. And this excerpt comes from Lake 8, which was published by Platform Review. And I took this backpacking trip about 2 or maybe 3 years ago now with my partner Caleb. And at the time I was entering menopause. And we decided to do a lake survey. And these lake surveys were done in the 90s. They hadn't been done again, but they were done by a female who would go in there by herself, and she'd take a pack raft and get out and fish and see what was in the lake. And they made the Idaho Fish and Game made the decision a few years back that they would stop stocking some of these lakes, which was fantastic, which is a good thing for these lakes, because not all alpine lakes ever had fish. Not all lakes always have fish. And these particular did not have fish. That meant they were able to provide a home for frogs, Columbia spotted frogs, which the rosy finch really enjoyed being near because there was larvae they could eat from them. And so when I was up there, we had this map, this old map that I had tucked away with me that Caleb had given me. And I was really excited to check out these lakes and to fish them and see what fish were there. But we came to some of the descriptions of the fish or of the lakes, and it said barren. And it really made me think about what that word means, barren, especially entering menopause when I would no longer be able to bear a child. And Caleb and I have no children. And at that, now it's a moot point. But what does that mean when society sees a lake as non-fish producing, as they like to call it, which means it's not good for hunting, and why would anybody go up there, and it's not even going to be listed on the maps. And how does that relate to women once they reach an age where they're not child producing and we're not young, and we change in the eyes of society. So this story came from that, and it came from a picture that I wish I could like screen share with you. But I didn't get that ready. Maybe in the after party, I'll find it. But we've hiked out to several of the lakes. There's, I think, 10 in the chain, and we had hiked all the way out through this chain of lakes, which I'll call Belvedere Lakes. And we're hiking back to our camp. And we stopped at this Lake 8, which was gorgeous. I mean, it was like jumping into turquoise. Absolutely beautiful. We stripped off all of our clothes and we got in the water. And that's where this begins, after my partner had taken a picture of me in this lake. Even now, months later, I look at the picture and I am there again in Lake 8. My almost post-menstrual body. Moments after he takes the picture, Caleb joins me, swims out beside me, dives beneath the surface, and rises and says, "Open your eyes while you're under." I do. And what I see is endless, is what fish stocked 40 years before must have seen. And it is not potential, nor is it lack. It is a feeling of creation, or having been so forgotten so fully that the need to exist for others is completely gone. I watch sun reflect off the minerals suspended in the water, and I move among them like I am swimming through memories, like I am spawning. I stay under as long as my lungs allow, until they ache with the need for air. When I finally bring my head back above water, I find Carhart, our oldest dog, swimming beside me. Cisco follows on the shore. Caleb is within arm's reach, and my blood, in the last of my reproductive days, is slowly draining from me. And yet I know I will walk out of this lake more complete than when I had entered it. I swallow the water on my lips, blink it into my eyes. When we leave the next day, it is not without a feeling that I have left something behind. Not the 2 feathers, one Clark's nutcracker for Caleb, one magpie for me, that I had found as we hiked, stuck into the ground at the edge of the dry flat where we ate our supper, shared our morning coffee. Not some gear or random thing dropped. The map, now folded together with a larger map of the whole forest, is in my pack, tucked among the debris, the food uneaten, the damp clothes. Its words innocuous among all that I carry. I feel no regret for not pulling fish from the lake to eat or bring home, or pocketing this rock or that to place in the bowl of forest souvenirs that serves as a talking piece on our coffee table. It was something different, something left without regret, not an offering, not trash. Something like a wish that I didn't need granted any longer. As we made our way up the steep slope, I looked back to the mud flat. The frogs, the tadpoles, the feathers left to twist in the wind, none of that could be seen. From this height, this distance, the tracks of the deer and her fawn, the blue of the mountain gentian, the blood, it was all part of a landscape. And the place where we had put our tent was better for our absence, though I hoped that some of our spirit remained and might be felt by whatever lay there next. I closed my eyes and felt the low cramp in my belly that for 35 years has reminded me of the capabilities of my body. I looked back to the landscape, all the way across the lakes, see again the sparkling underwater of Lake 8, and remember what it was like to break through the surface, for my eyes to focus on the face of Caleb, hear Carhart beside me, Cisco panting on the shore, my own breath as I renewed it. The feeling of aliveness and contentment. I turned and looked up the hill and saw Caleb and the dogs waiting for me. The top of the climb was only a few steps away. In an hour, the lakes would be behind me. The frogs could return to their shoreline perches. And in Lake 8, the blood I left behind was already diluted.
That's stunningly beautiful.
Thank you. There's, going back to what Michael had asked earlier, there's a moment in that story where I talk about the sounds that we would have heard 200 years ago, 300 years ago, and some of those would have been the birthing sounds of Native women who had come to this place to give birth. And how, for me, it used to be that I didn't necessarily want to go backpacking when I was bleeding, and that changed quite a bit and it just became natural to do that and to just be able to bleed on the land and bleed with the land. And what's more natural than imagining that and having a doe walk by with her fawn and sniff that blood and have that in common. I think for women, that's as close, it's also one of those topics where people are like, I'm not sure I want to read a menstruation story, but I think that's also a failing of our society to pretend that women not only have this wonderful power of recreation, but we also share blood and share something with animals that is pretty amazing. And it's a beautiful, wonderful process and beautiful when it begins and when it ends.
I consider it our feral side. So I think it's like an important thread or conversation that we don't have enough. Even among women, we don't have that conversation enough. Or maybe in smaller groups, there's some supportive, exchanges, but actually what to expect or what we experience, what we have and what we leave behind. I think it's really important in writing. And I think that that's one of the pieces for me, why that was a stunning piece. And I think that it was perfect.
Thank you.
Other than that, it's a perfect essay to learn from, not only what we live in the feral side of us, but it's perfect because it's a necessary piece of the collective conversation for women and how we need to be represented in the writing. So.
I agree. And I'm teaching this class I'm super excited about in July, that I'm going to take 8 women backpacking, and we're going to talk about women's wisdom and ecology, and we're going to learn some Native language. We're going to spend this time with all women biologists and archaeologists and ethnobotanists, and hopefully inspire more women to start writing their stories of wildness and without shame, but without also the need to make them palatable to male readers, by which I mean, it doesn't have to be covered in science and using taxonomies and what's become acceptable for how women should talk about nature, but also that, as you said, feral side, and how really our bodies and what's happening to the environment. I can speak particularly for the West, since I've been here almost my whole life, is really reflective. What's happened, especially to Native women's bodies and missing, murdered Indigenous women, and what we see happening to public lands seems to be mirroring. each other, and that extraction and that recreation, and nothing with reciprocation. So we'll speak a lot about reciprocative recreation and about women's bodies in nature, and not be victims, but be strong in place.
Is that class full? Is that something that you can tell us about with a name to where maybe we can help
Yeah,
fill that?
it's the really wonderful group called Free Flow Institute, who they offer great classes, not just like mine, but all different kinds of classes with fantastic writers. Francisco Cantu, Paco Cantu is going to do one on the border of Mexico and Texas through Big Bend, and just a number of fantastic writers do these classes throughout the summer. And you can raft, most of them are rafting, but I really wanted to have the opportunity to not recreate on a river, just to study any expectations from it. It didn't need to work for us, but we could just be with the river without being on it. So yeah, Free Flow Institute, all the classes are up there.
It sounds absolutely amazing. I know I'm going to check it out. We have, we're right at 6, and I'm going to scan my questions quickly. I think we covered a lot of the ones I wanted to check in with you, and I think that that class or workshop would fall into it. But I typically ask, are there creative collaborations or projects on the horizon that you want to share with us that we can help get the word out?
Yeah. Gosh, so if you're looking for a writing workshop this summer, I'm director of the Elk River Writers Workshop that will be in Paradise Valley, Montana, with the writer Linda Hogan, which I'm very obviously excited about. We also have Jerry Drew Lanham. If you followed any of his work, he's going to be teaching there. Rick Bass will be there, as well as the poets Pamela Ushak and William Pittroot. So they'll be there. Plus we'll have a panel. And this is like, you're the first, all of you, however many there are of us right now, are the first to hear that Jim Inote is going to be our keynote speaker. If you don't know who Jim is, looking him up will be well worth your while. Wonderful human who has so much to offer, particularly in high altitude farming, but also in native farming and mapping. He's doing a great project on mapping native lands that have nothing to do with traditional ways of mapping. So that's really cool. That'll be in August at elkriverwriters.org. I'm working with 2 other poets on an anthology of Cascadia, a literary field guide of Cascadia. So it'll be a way to move through the region we know as Cascadia. Sometimes we call it the Pacific Northwest, but that leaves out a greater part of Canada that should be included in that. And just the beings that live in that area through poetry. So just poems about everything from fireweed to brown bears, black bears. So those are some really super exciting things. Always High Desert Journal is one of my favorite projects to work with. Everything, it's awesome. And I work a 9 to 5 for McPaws Animal Shelter. So if you're looking for a new fur buddy, that's my heart is obviously within animals, particularly strays, and making sure that they find homes. So it's almost kitten season. So if you need a buddy through the rest of the pandemic, McPaws Animal Shelter in McCall, Idaho will hook you up there. So yeah, all good things, really. So many wonderful opportunities.
I would like to back up for just a little bit. The keynote, how do you spell Jim's last name?
Enote.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I wanted to make sure that we heard that. So I'm going to, there's one question here. I'll address the question, and then I'm going to unmute everybody so they can say hello and ask other questions. And that is, are there scholarships for Native students to study with their peers? Not a workshop, something in depth with the Native poet.
There are. I think that there are great opportunities through IAIA, and Barbara Robideau, who is here with us, could speak to that a little bit or point you in the right direction from that. My secret dream beyond saving all the dogs and getting to hike until I'm well into my 90s is affording some sort of a motorhome to go into communities that are underserved and making sure that their voices can be heard and that they can do that kind of thing, work with Native poets or work with anyone that they seem a good mentor. It sucks that privilege has become right, or that writing has become privileged, that it's something that, everyone thinks they need to go to an MFA to get. I went to an MFA. They're very expensive, and it's not something that can easily happen. But in my opinion, the voices that are on the dirt roads that don't have access to these things, who might not even be able to zoom in these kind of talks, even though we've had so many free, are voices that we really need to hear. So to answer Leo's question, there needs to be more. There are some out there, but there absolutely needs to be more. And we did offer one at Elk River Writers Workshop that went to Therese Malhot, who you might know from Heartberries. She applied for that and won it. And we're thrilled that she's going to be there. But there just can't be enough of that. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but maybe that answer in itself will tell you the need for these things. They're out there. Yeah. I agree. I have a little camper trailer. I mean, we can start there, and Leo, and all I need to do is be able to pay all the generous writers who I know would donate the heck out of their time, and would love almost all the writers I know, big, generous hearted people who I know. Luis Huria would be there with me every minute that he could, and Kim Barnes would do it. Unfortunately, we too have to eat. So
Yes.
find a way to make all that happen and to get into those underserved communities. What a dream that would be.
Well, as you hit the road, I will take my little letterpress with you. It's called Traveling Duende, and that's the same purpose that I bought it for, was to take it into underserved schools. And I have done that quite a bit in the Northwest, but it would be lovely to collaborate with you somewhere and meet somewhere in between or otherwise. So something we'll have to keep in mind. A lovely way of going about it with a motorhome. Mine doesn't require a motorhome. I just have to have like a Subaru and I can hit the road. I have allowed people to unmute yourselves to say hello, unmask yourself, and show your face if you so desire. You have control of that part, but you now have the ability to unmute yourself to say hello. And I just want to thank you again, CMarie. That was fabulous. That was your generous responses and your writing and your poems. Just thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
CMarie, I just want to thank you so much for joining us. This has just been wonderful and really inspiring. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. What a cool thing to know on Valentine's Day, all of you would give up an hour and a half to be here with me. That's such an honor. Yeah, I'm deeply moved by that. Thank you so much. We can all share a little love right here.
Yes.
Always. It was cool. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Nice to see you.
Does anybody else want to say hello? I know that.
Hello, CMarie. Thank you.
Hi, David. Are you all shoveled out down in your part of town?
Yes, prepared for the next one.
Right. Good. Get your groceries ordered early.
Thanks for coming, David. Anybody else want to say hello? Or have other questions?
Michael, are you?
Let's see. You're not. Let me get you unmuted, Michael.
Hi, Marie. How are you?
I'm well. How are you, Michael?
Good. I'm in Pittsburgh. We've had about 3 feet of snow in the last few days, so we're snowed in now too. My dog, who loves the snow, is having a good time, but the rest of us are not. So it's nice to bring some poetry into our house. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming.
Yeah.
I've never been to your part of the world. I think maybe I might have had a layover there, but I can imagine that snow there, 3 feet of snow there means a whole lot more than 3 feet of snow here.
Well, my wife and I live on a mountain called Mount Washington, and it's in the middle of the city of Pittsburgh, but it actually overlooks the city. And around our neighborhood is a band of thick woods, a lot of birds and foxes and others. So in some ways, we have the best of both worlds because we're in the middle of a city with all the amenities of a city, but we're also surrounded by nature. So it's a nice place we found ourselves in. So.
Good. Awesome.
We have Robert, would you mind sharing about dovetails? Would that be okay?
Yes, I can do that. Our anthology comes out twice a year. This year, the theme is Letters from the Self to the World, and the guest editor is Adriana Paramo. I'm going to put that on there right now, copy and paste it. The deadline is March 1st. The publication date is May 1st. And hang on.
Putting you on the spot.
Get it all. I think that's.
There we go.
Oh, nice.
And CMarie, we would love to have you submit something if you feel like it.
Even
I love this.
Even if you don't feel like it, we would love for you to do it. Just being sassy.
Absolutely.
We did get off to a slow start with submissions, but it's picked up, and I've received some amazing work that stunned me, brought tears to my eyes, and shocked me. And that's what I want. So,
Right.
yeah.
Wonderful. And
Thank you, Robert.
do we submit to you, or is it on Submittable?
It is through Submittable, and hang on. I'm not ready.
Okay.
I'll put the link on here in a minute.
If you have a little piece on that, I'll make sure and share it with my folks as well. Look, Barbara's coming back. Hopefully
Yes.
she's in a little part of New Mexico that sometimes I think goes in and out of power just outside of Santa Fe there. So she might have dipped out on us.
Who is that, Barbara?
Uh-huh. Yeah, it looks like she made it back in.
No, there we go. I asked her if she wanted to unmute. So we're at the point, Barbara, now that you're back in, that if you'd like to unmute yourself and say hello, you're welcome to do that.
Nope.
See. Okay, I think that's it.
All right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for spending time with us and sharing your words. And thank you for how you move through the world. It's so important to have that model for others, and you do it so beautifully.
Thank you so much. Thanks. It's good to hear that. I hope you all have a wonderful Valentine's evening.
Okay.
Tara and I will.
Thank you. Good night.